Good evening, and welcome to the third of 3 roundtable discussions we've been having with nonprofits in the Valley. Tonight is hosted by the Argyros Theater, and Argyros Performing Arts Center, and whose Tierney Theater we are tonight, and also by Dark to Light Productions, which has been donating their time and talent to produce these events for us. I'm Sally Gillespie, and I'm with the Spur Foundation. For those of you who don't know us, we're a local community foundation that works to inspire effective philanthropy in the Wood River Valley. And we do that by helping donors find their fit with the organizations that might be aligned with their interests, and also to help them have the impact that they desire. And we also work with nonprofits to coach them and help them achieve their missions. The concept for these roundtables has been to give people a chance to learn about issues from a bigger perspective than they might normally with individual marketing materials or outreach by the organizations who do work. And the subject tonight is human services. It is a big subject. We have 5 groups participating with us tonight out of a field of potentially 18 organizations or more that could have participated. And I realize that will lead us to an imperfect snapshot of what's going on in the world of our community, particularly because of the pandemic and how busy everyone in this sector has been. But I do think that when you hear about some of the collaborations and interactions between organizations, you'll still get a good dose of the reality of what's been going on in our community. I would like to do a couple of shout outs though, and honor some of the organizations that aren't here that work intensively and very successfully in this arena to support our community. We have the St. Luke's Wood River Community Center for Community Health, the Hunger Coalition, who many of you must know, Crisis Hotline, Men's Second Chance Living, which has a sober living house for men recovering from addiction, Higher Ground, Swiftshire Ranch. Both of those work with people with various differences that inhibit their ability to enjoy sort of outdoor recreational activities and life as we might know it. Flourish Foundation, Hospice, an amazing organization, unique in the country. It touches about 40% of the people, 80% of the people who die in our valley for free with hospice and supportive services, and they work with people who have chronic conditions too. You don't have to be in a terminal situation to get their benefits. We have the Sun Club, Mountain Humane, which many of you might know for working for animals, but a huge portion of what they do is about the people who enjoy those pets and those animals. Arch Community Housing Trust, which works very hard to make sure that there is some progress in the issues of affordable housing in our community. And of course, we have churches and other kinds of safety networks that exist for our community. So our regrets that we couldn't do a panel that involved everybody, but I think you'll still find tonight's discussion very robust, and please keep those organizations in mind because they are doing good work. Audience, I want to mention to you, you can ask questions throughout the evening by typing them into a chat box on the side, and they will be relayed to me, and we'll deal with those mostly at the end of the evening, so please feel free to contribute that way. Now I'd like to introduce our participants. We'll kind of go left to right here. If you would say your name, your title, which organization you work for, and how you serve our community.
Good evening. My name is Jovita Pina. I am the Associate Director for the Senior Connection. And at the Senior Connection, we work to connect seniors with meaningful programs, essential services, their peers, also the community, so that we can foster passion-filled and meaningful lives.
Great, thank you.
I'm Tricia Swartling, CEO with the Advocates, and the Advocates was founded in 1991, and we save lives and change futures by providing people who have experienced relationship abuse and or sexual assault with crisis intervention and a wide variety of supportive services. We do this through our Client Services Center, which is located in Central Haley, and we also have 2 shelter buildings and 22 transitional housing apartments. We also believe that prevention is paramount, and we provide education on healthy relationships and bystander intervention and other topics to local youth in all the schools. And I'm happy to be here tonight. Thank you.
My name is Brittany Shipley, and I am the Executive Director at the National Alliance of Mental Illness of the Wood River Valley. Our vision and mission involved educating, supporting, and advocating individuals with mental health, and that extends to their families as well, who are trying to help and navigate and support. So we provide support to a vast age range, from middle school and high school students to summer programming, to adults living with mental health care conditions, and to family members who are just seeking to support their loved ones. We do Medicaid access classes, and we work a lot with the organizations that have been listed tonight to help provide the right supports.
I'm Mary Fouth. I'm the Executive Director of the Blaine County Charitable Fund. We are an emergency assistance fund that help those that live and work in Blaine County that are experiencing hardship due to, or financial hardship due to an unanticipated crisis. So we pay bills focused mostly around keeping people stable in their homes, able to get to and from work with transportation and healthy. And we serve people regardless of their document status.
My name is Sarah Santillis. I'm the Executive Director of the Alliance of Idaho. We protect the human rights of immigrants. We have a hotline for urgent immigration situations. We have legal help, and we connect people to legal resources. We run community workshops to educate people about their rights and about daily things, from how do I apply for scholarships for college to how do I get a driver's license to help me. My husband has been detained, so we run the gamut of things, but our goal is to protect immigrants and their families, and I love collaborating with these amazing people, and I feel honored to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's a big topic, human services, and I thought I might tee it up a little bit before digging into the questions. One thing I wanted to point out is there is a term that maybe our audience has heard before called ALICE, which stands for people, it's a category of people who are asset limited, income constrained, but they're employed. So these are people who are actually working. We have many in our community, and in 2017, I think that was the right year, there was a survey done, and Blaine County was included in that survey, and it showed that 50% of our community is one paycheck, one surprise in their life, illness or loss of employment or missed paycheck away from descending into poverty. And those are hard things to recover from. So we're going to talk about what's been going on in the last year, but I want to sort of baseline it that everything that's happened last year has exacerbated many of these issues. It's not like they just started because of the pandemic. Human services, clearly government has a role to play here. There's a Department of Health and Human Services that has food assistance programs and financial assistance program and Medicaid and even behavioral health programs. There's the Department of Labor that provides unemployment. School district has for years and continues to have meal programs for their students that continued even when school wasn't open. So there are resources that come to bear, but we have a very big, as I mentioned, 18 organizations at least, focused on human services. And I wanted to begin with your perspective, those of you who are in touch with this, to have you comment on, are those types of programs active in our community, who's benefiting from them, and then we'll segue to why do you all still need to be in existence? So who would like to maybe talk a little bit about what they know of the public programs that are in the community now?
Well, I can jump in. Since I've been with the Advocates for a long time, about 26 years, I've seen the evolution of the government services being pulled out of rural Idaho, as far as not having offices in a lot of the rural communities. And even though we're a vibrant tourist community, we still are pretty much considered a rural community. So the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Labor, they pulled out and don't have offices locally anymore. And Idaho Legal Aid has never been here. So that doesn't mean that people here can't access the services. It just makes it more difficult and harder. And so people either have to go to Twin Falls or have transportation, ability to do things online, which not everybody has access to. So it's just over, the last couple of decades, it's been a lot harder, I think, for people here to access services. And so a lot of us nonprofits have had to be able to be on the ground here locally and available to help people who need help, like right away.
Yeah.
I would just say that's also complicated by status, by immigration status. And many families in our valley, immigrants are a thriving part of our valley, and part of our goal at the Alliance is to help families flourish. But most families who have an immigrant or two immigrants are mixed status families, which means they might have somebody who's a citizen, they might have someone who's DACA, they might have an asylum seeker. There's like a variety of statuses, and there was so much confusion in the last administration and so many rules that cast doubt on whether using those public services would put your citizenship applications at risk. So even when services are available, people are a lot of times not availing themselves of those services.
Yeah, we started at the onset of COVID And at that point, there are plenty of people that were plugged into, a section of our community that were plugged into those services, knew of them, knew to go to their advocate caseworkers or the Hunger Coalition or St. Luke's to help get access to the programs that they needed. But when the community-wide crisis happens and those numbers double and triple, then there's a whole set of people that didn't know where to go and what they could access. And so there's a panic of sorts. And there were many months where it was months away from getting unemployment, and there's stimulus checks coming and future rent assistance through state programs if you even apply or qualified. And so there were a lot of people that were in panic and needed those services but didn't know where to go, and it wasn't in their nature to have those automatic resources at their disposal.
So when you think of what were sort of the dominoes that started to tip over for people, is there any way to characterize that? Was it really the loss of employment, or was it the schools closing and having to be home for childcare? What were you seeing most often as the triggers that tip people into perhaps a more desperate situation than they would have been otherwise?
I'll jump in. For the Senior Connection, really for our seniors, it was the threat of losing their life. If they did have family members or neighbors or friends that could assist them before, they didn't want to let those individuals in their home anymore. And likewise, the family members or neighbors didn't want to put their life at risk. So just the threat of, getting COVID is really what triggered, the loss of help. And also, I think people wanting to help, just fearful. They didn't want to be the person giving another person COVID.
Yeah.
I would add in mental health too, I think so many of us rely on our schedules. That's what helps keep us going. And that's no different, for somebody whose brain that works a little bit differently. And so the compiled stress of being isolated or having your routine thrown or not being able to go to work or losing your job or having your kids there and trying to run a Zoom meeting and how to help your kids, I think all that compiled stress really exacerbated mental health as we know it and made it more relatable in more homes than we'd ever seen before at this time. And so, services like mental health providers here in Blaine County, they're taxed and they don't have any more room to fit more clients who are seeking treatment for the things they're struggling with from COVID.
Yeah, I know for the advocates clients, the number one thing that drove most of them into crisis was the loss of employment. Things just shut down, and sometimes they weren't even informed. So that was number one. And then the second thing was people who then got sick and had COVID and had kind of the double whammy of if they had a job, they couldn't go to work. So it was those two things for us, what we saw were the first kind of things to affect our population.
The digital divide was mentioned. I know, well, I'll explain that term for those who didn't catch. There's plenty of people who do not either have access to the internet or have the devices from which to access the internet or the knowledge of how to navigate on devices, even if someone can get them connected. And so much of the information that was being presented and the opportunities even to apply for unemployment were not in person like they used to be. They were online. And does anybody care to comment on what they saw or experienced about people's just really being pinched by the fact that the world had changed around them and they didn't have the experience to plug in to what was coming down the line?
I saw a lot of creative thinking around that. I was on conversations with many of the people who were here. I think that Spur hosted trying to figure that out. Unemployment claims, you have to not just file them once, but over and over and over again. And many people were depending on the library, for example, for computers. So I think Jenny Emery Davidson did creative things like making library computer banks open. But there's all these ways, I think, in the working with the Latino Hispanic immigrant population here, there's all these ways that status impacts things that you don't even think about. So already it's hard to apply for these programs, but if you have this question in the back of your mind, if I apply for federal assistance, is it going to make my mother get deported? Is it going to make my father not able to apply for citizenship? Then that also compounds that. So yes, there was a digital divide, and there's also a status divide as well.
And I think the efforts that I think Spur was helpful to implement, and through the crisis hotlines, Neighbor Helping Neighbors program, help to bridge some of those gaps and really going into places in the community, providing that information, that security of knowing they could come to the Hunger Coalition and get their food, get some rent covered. They could go to St. Luke's, get some health coverage there, and really, and sitting with them literally and filling out those applications and those things that needed to happen with somebody that spoke Spanish, and made it really conducive for them to get access and then help navigate the system. So a lot of things were happening to help bridge that digital divide.
I'm glad you mentioned that Neighbors Helping Neighbors, because in these calls that we would gather among a number of players in the nonprofit arena, when it was who knows what's happening, trying to just connect about the issues and possible solutions. The fact that trust was an issue, you're bringing that up, Sarah, also, someone's not going to just go to a new place, a new location, to try and get help from someone they've never met before, and that having familiar faces sort of going door to door and creating a sense of we have information for trust us has built up over time. So kudos to the crisis hotline and others who are participating in that kind of boots on the ground work. Are there any characteristics of the people that have been hit hard during this time that would surprise our audience, that that would defy stereotypes perhaps of who is being impacted? And you all represent different facets of service, so you might all have an answer to that.
I can speak a little bit. I would say our seniors, a lot of our seniors surprised us in their resiliency. They just have the mindset that they're going to get through this. A lot of them have been through war, the Great Depression, just all kinds of challenges before, and they're not going to let, a virus be what finally takes them. And so they're resilient, and they call us, every day and say, when can we get back? So that, I think, would be a surprise. We saw very extreme, fear, and others that even though they wouldn't go out there, they're resilient and they're optimistic.
Nice.
And I don't know if it'd be surprising. It's not surprising, probably. Like, the people that needed financial assistance were probably the lowest. They were the lowest of low income that we assisted. But when you look at the industries of people that we helped, housekeeping being number one, food and beverage being number two, and construction being number three, not only by the people that hold those jobs, but by the nature of some of those jobs are, they're part-time here and part-time there. They're easy to cut, and they easily went away. And then we saw people, the reiteration or the renewed crisis is what we would call it. They were trying to reinvent themselves. They couldn't go out and get, that same part-time work. They had to go find it in a different industry. So it's kind of I guess that would be surprising, is that those people that hold those jobs really they have to float around and find whatever work it is that can be made available to them, and not necessarily for a trait that they really possess to offer.
Yeah. I know mental health we were talking about too, that doesn't have potentially socioeconomic boundaries the way some of these other topics might. What have you experienced there, Brittany?
For some people it is, access to get their mental health needs, to get a counseling service, things like that. We're grateful to work with the St. Luke Center for Community Health to help with that and get scholarships. But the thing that COVID really changed for populations with mental health was that, it was no longer like that one guy down on that one street in the neighborhood who kind of has, he's a little out there, a little different, or maybe struggles with some mental health. It became an almost every household normality, because people were isolated and because you couldn't see people, and you were juggling all these stressors about, can I buy groceries for my family? And all these extra things. And so mental health became prevalent, whether people were experiencing anxiety over the virus or depression over being isolated. And so we started to see the increase through that.
And I know I've heard stories both in the domestic abuse arena or substance abuse arena, those conditions were aggravating to people who had tendencies or stories around that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about domestic violence is that people typically, when things get rough and tough, or like if they're going to be stuck with somebody in their house, and or like the holidays, like we don't see a huge uptick during the holidays because people want to create this idea of this is okay, we're going to have this nice family holiday. And so they actually do what they can to keep the abuse from either not happening or just put up with it. And so that is what happened at the beginning of the pandemic when people are in shelter in place. They had to like survive. And so they couldn't really leave, go anywhere. Who wants to be in a shelter with people you don't know during a pandemic? Who wants to take their kids to a shelter during a pandemic? So we knew abuse, they were trying to keep it not from happening. And then as time went on, that was difficult. And so we did start hearing about reports. And when people could start getting out, we did see an uptick in actual incidents. So yeah, it is interesting about domestic violence. And I think in just listening to everybody talk, I think one of the big things that we all have experienced is that people who weren't used to having to go to get aid had to also overcome the fear, like the stigma about, oh, I need help now, whether it's mental health or financial help or food or whatever, that a new group of people got impacted who weren't ever used to having to go get social services. And so they had to overcome that too. And I don't remember the name of it, the effort where they fed the restaurant workers, that group got together. I mean, those are great things that happened in our community where people got together to support people who weren't used to having to get help before.
The Hunger Coalition did correspond with me with some statistics. They serve 6,500 people, and that's 1 in 4 people in our community, and 50% of the people that came to them last year had never needed their services before. So, for a population of roughly 20,000, 6,500 people, it was a huge percentage of our community was at the point where they needed to get assistance with basic needs. There's a massive elephant in the room when we ever talk about needs, housing and cost of living. And I know that could be a forum on its own. But with the stimulus money and some other things that came in to maybe help people, none of that touched on the issues of housing for our community. And I'd be curious to know, what displacement we've really seen, how many people are, facing homelessness. The moratoriums on being evicted and things like that have helped, but is this a little time bomb? Who can comment on what we think we're seeing with the housing situation?
I did poll at least some of the housing communities that we work with, and we regularly, assist their community members. And I think the major ones are really working with their tenants, which is a hopeful thing, and working to work out plans to pay their rent, even if they're behind. I would say that during August, when there was a pause in the moratorium, we did see some people come to us with many, many months of back rent. So I am anticipating it in a sense, because all this rent and all this utility shut-off time is piling up and will be still due for many individuals. But there's also going to be an education process about how they can get help, whether it's to pay the bill or get through payment plans and talk to their creditors or their landlords. And then we also have the ending of a lot of foreclosure forbearance. So a lot of people that have been in forbearance are coming up on a year of that. And so they also will hit a time where then they're going to need to address their piling up of payments on their homes, and whether that's refinance knowledge and talking to their banker or figuring out what will work for them. So there is some bombs out there that I'm kind of keeping an eye on.
I've also seen a different end of that. I've seen landlords taking advantage of people who are in apartments and are already vulnerable because of the pandemic, and then are also vulnerable because of status. And so taking advantage of the fact that the people feel like they can't go to the authorities to ask for help, or they're maybe not using banks for certain reasons. And so there's been definitely some bad practices by landlords that have further jeopardized families being able to stay in their homes.
Yeah, I mean, we've been working at the Advocates really desperately to keep people in their housing, because you can't lose your housing right now, because you're not going to find another place to live. I mean, there's a 2 to 3 year wait for subsidized housing, and there's a year wait for affordable housing, so you can't lose your housing. And I think we've all been working together really to keep people in their housing. I mean, there have been positive things happening where landlords did reduce people's rents and let them not pay for a few months at the beginning of the pandemic. I think most, not knowing how long it was going to go on. So we have seen some positive things, but we've given out probably close to a couple $100,000, and I don't know what Mary's been giving out for in housing, rent assistance, mortgage payments. That's been our primary thing, keep people in their homes.
Which is intense. I've had to call you. Yeah. When you have a person in a relationship who's trying to leave, and you compound that with status and then economic situation, or just maybe they're middle class and the situation in our valley, you can't find another place to live. So what happens then? And I think that put a new twist, which I'm sure you've been thinking about for years, about that if you can't find affordable housing, not only is it a housing issue, but it can be a safety issue for vulnerable family members. And that's something, I think one of the things the pandemic has shown, or the question that's been in my mind in the pandemic, is, are we a community that takes care of each other? Are we a country that takes care of each other? Maybe on the country part, but definitely in a community, yes. But a lot of the reasons we exist is because the structures that we've built in capitalism, or whatever you want to call it, don't work. They don't work. That's why our organizations exist in some ways. And I think the pandemic has just increased that sense. And what gives me hope is that we're in conversations talking about how do we dismantle barriers, not just in this crisis time, but in other times. How do we dismantle racism in our community? How do we dismantle sexism in our community? How do we make mental health, part of something that we value in our community? And I think that's really exciting to me, and I think we'll be led by the amazing people who lead nonprofits here, and also by the communities that have been drastically impacted. Like, there's so much knowledge in immigrant communities. There's so much knowledge in communities of women, and so our job, I think, as leaders is to center those voices, the voices of the most marginalized, will show us the way.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important too to know, as we're talking about all these services that are being used, or the housing issues or things like that, that filling out for these things through health and welfare, trying to apply for these services is not easy. And so, if you don't already know how to do it, or don't know how to work with the loan office correctly, or even to have the right conversation on the phone with health and welfare, it can be almost impossible to navigate. And so I think it's just really important to know how difficult it is to even access these services, and that's why so many agencies have to work together to help make sure that people can get it.
Well, anybody who does their own taxes
will
realize that it's a form. It should be easy to fill out, but it's hard
we have all these, I think, aid programs that, child support, for example, system that people think, oh, somebody gets divorced and they're lower income, they're going to get child support from their partner. Well, most of the clients that we work with, that doesn't happen, and the system is flawed, and these women fight to get child support, and for some reason it just doesn't work out, and they're having to be single mothers in this valley where it's super expensive, and the child support system doesn't work for them. Why? We could go down a rabbit hole about that, but I won't. But it's kind of like Sarah was saying, we have a lot of programs and policies that if you don't work in what we work in, you don't know that they don't work. And there's a lot of fixing that needs to happen, so.
Okay. I remind the audience that you can type in questions in the comment box at the side of your screen, and we'll try and address those. So one person has commented already that, income is not the only variable that made people to be affected by COVID. We've all been affected, right? And perhaps in the mental health and every opportunity, and the housing market is one of those things that daily I'm reading about people that the unit that they've lived in for years is turning into an Airbnb, and therefore now they're struggling to stay in our community. I'd like to ask you all to share a story that would be something you're going to remember for a long time from this experience. And it could be any kind of story, but what's an experience that you had that's so memorable and so symbolic of what this has been like?
I'd like to share, it specifically is related to the housing. We had a senior who lived in a condo, and she wasn't a member of the Senior Connection, but we got involved again as a referral from another nonprofit. And this woman's landlord wanted to sell her condo. So she was being evicted because she wasn't moving because she couldn't find anywhere else to live. but we were able to negotiate a kind of extension of her rent there, and it was just devastating. We ended up being more of a case manager for her. She had mental health issues. She had health issues. I physically went to her home and helped transport her to a facility in southern Idaho. And it was just so unfortunate to see that this woman who was living independently had nowhere else to go, and she had to move to a facility. And I can just remember her saying, "Can I please just take my coats and my dresses?" And I helped pack her coats and her dresses. She didn't want to leave everything, and she did leave everything. She couldn't take it to the facility. The worst part I just recently found out is she got COVID at the facility and now is in the hospital. And St. Luke's is trying to gain guardianship of her so that they can place her in a location where she's going to be taken care of. So it really is just devastating. And again, dealing with other housing issues, and other seniors going to be evicted here soon out of her apartment. So we become case managers, and because they can't navigate getting assistance from government agencies, and so it's very time consuming, and for them it's urgent, and they feel overwhelmed and they don't know what to do.
Yeah. Other stories?
I can tell a story. We have a hotline that's answered by Becky Lopez. She's bilingual, and we got a call about asylum seekers in our community. They've been living here for a really long time. They're here, they came the right way. They've been always showing up for their checkup every single, I think it's month or every 3 times a year. And they went to their regular checkup, and their lawyer had made a mistake, and so they were going to detain the husband and the wife, and they had 3 young children at home, and they just begged, please, the husband begged, take me, but let my wife go home to our children. And they did. They let the wife go home, but we helped them, and Becky went to their house, and I will never forget her calling me so just intensely moved by, she was waiting for them to gather the paperwork that she needed so that we could find them proper legal help, because this is a big problem in immigration. Lots of not great lawyers take advantage of vulnerable people, so we needed to find them proper legal help. And one of the children held her hand and looked up at her and said, "When is my daddy coming home?" And it just, we did bring her father home, that little girl's father home, but it took, us, it took a big law firm in Texas, it took lawyers in our community, it took months and months and months of time just to help this family stay together. And these are people who are, a vibrant community members, just at risk from an error, and needed a lot of support to be able to navigate this, medieval system. I've just been on phone trees trying to do it and end up being like, agent, I can't figure it out, and it's not my life at stake. So that I try to think of that story every time when I remember why we do what we do.
A big one for us was, during the stay-at-home orders, when everybody was isolated in their homes, people were accessing virtual formats of mental health counseling. And that was really difficult for a lot of people because you don't necessarily want to talk about your situation when your family's sitting across in the living room, or especially if some of your mental health is maybe related to your family situation. And so a lot of people were feeling like they had nowhere to go. They couldn't get the treatment they felt that they needed, even if they advocated for it. And so I remember specifically working with a student here locally, and the student, everybody was wrapping their arms around them. How can we help you? How can we support you? And the student just kept saying, who has some extenuating circumstances at home, that they had nowhere to go, that they had no one to talk to. They weren't allowed to take the virtual Zoom on a phone or something in the backyard to get even a slight bit of privacy. And their mental health was just deteriorating because they were quite literally not just trapped physically, but mentally, because they couldn't get what they needed. And I just remember this student saying to me that they had said, I never realized how helpful coming to you and seeing you guys for mental health support was until I didn't have it, and then I realized how much I've always needed it.
And you've seen a surge in particularly among youth in is it the Bluebirds program?
Yeah, yep.
So
our Bluebirds program
maybe
has grown
share
like
what's happened with that.
quadruple.
Wow.
So how many students is that probably that are
Right now, it's around 100 just in the public schools
a week?
a week.
A week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of them I see 4 days a week or 2 days a week, or, so some of them are repeats and that's not included. And then there's just, the emergent calls, or we started an equine program with these kids. And so then there's another 25 that are enrolled in that on
With
Fridays.
Swisher? Is that with Swisher? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Good. Mary or Tricia, do you have a story you want to share?
Yeah, we have a woman and her 2 kids, and she had a cat or dog, I'm not sure, because we allow people to have animals, pets in our housing, and she was in our transitional housing, and the average length of stay in our housing is about 9 months. We thought it would be 6 months when we set it up, but because of the waits and the shortage, it's been taking a little longer. So anyway, when she lost her job because of the pandemic, this is a good story. We really offer people, we want to empower people to be able to change their own lives. So we offer case management, and we let them tell us, well, what do you need help with? What do you want to change? What do you need support for? And they make their own plan. And one of the things that she made was that she needed to work on her finances and her financial situation. And so we do have financial education. And so she worked with our case manager and went through the financial education program and took that time out from being out of work, and took her stimulus check and looked at her credit and figured out that she had some credit issues that she had to take care of, and she was able to pay off some big bills and get herself really positioned and set up to get into the community housing and move out of our transitional housing. So that the pandemic gave her a chance to actually, do something that could change her life and move her forward.
Nice.
We have, there's so many week by month by everyday story of just relieving stress for somebody and in paying their rent or whatever the bill is that's looming over them. And one particular family that we helped initially at the start of the pandemic, and then later that summer, and even then pulled in some partners. And Blaine County Housing Authority helped here, and Salvation Army helped there, and then they were hit with a medical need, and the wife in the situation was losing her eyesight. So as much as they wanted to get back to work and find what work would help them, make it through this time, she literally couldn't work without a $6,000 cash up front surgery. And we'd already kind of feeling like we've helped this family in the way that we can. And when I made some phone calls, and this happens all the time, this isn't just a one-off situation. When I made a call to the church and Salvation Army and told St. Luke's that I was working on this and they can contribute this, they even said, like, this is so great to be such a community effort for this one particular family that they've seen over the years as well. And then to know that the day that she went in and got her surgery, that they were feeling like, okay, we can maybe get back to normal, and I hope that they do, but this is the reality for so many families that won't be able to dig out of this very easily.
Well, so that brings up another question of, what is working? What have been some of the bright spots in the world of services that you guys offer? Things that you might imagine carrying forward that you'd like to see even boosted as we go forward as a community.
Can I talk about our collaboration? The thing about the hotline and the ways that we help immigrant populations is every single call is different. Just when we think, oh, we got it, I understand how this works, there's like some new thing. And one of the things I hadn't thought carefully about is that people who have, people from mixed status families don't often use banks for loans. They use trusted family people, or they use people who are not to be trusted out of desperation. And so someone had called us, and I'll obscure the details, but they had ended up for not a huge amount of money, they had put up basically this land that they owned as collateral. And they hadn't they had signed it. It was in English, so they didn't quite understand what it said. They hadn't had an attorney look at it, and they were feeling like they had to keep secret because they felt like they had to really get this money to be able to move something that was very important to them. And so I just thought my way around it, and I was like, I bet Mary can help me with this. So she probably dreads now when she sees that I'm calling. I thought, would you be into doing a microloan? Like, this family's working, they would be able to pay you back pretty rapidly. Like, the payment plans got set up, and we worked with Sam Linnett, who's a local attorney who we're contracting with now to act as a legal case manager. And this family got helped. You know, everything that needed to happen happened. They're safe, and they're not at risk of losing their home because they needed a certain amount of money that they didn't have because they live paycheck to paycheck. So for me, one of the highlights of this work is the kind of collaboration that happens in our valley and the problem solving. Like, people are creative. Your board was super fast. You were fast. I mean, I was like, this is the best thing that's ever happened. It was really amazing.
One thing that I feel really glad that we were able to act and over, you know, the last set of months or the last year, but in that situation, it's a perfect example. It's like being able to really helpfully, very quickly make a decision that's very, very impactful for a family.
Like, it was like a life or death decision, and it was a brand new idea, and it happened in 2 days. Like, that's extraordinary.
Yeah, I would say that's an amazing thing about our nonprofit community is we are very nimble, and we do work so well together that we can make things happen pretty quickly versus if you're working with a government aid, you know, you got paperwork and it gets rejected and nobody can make it anyway. So that's a great thing about it.
And those bonds and ties have really, I see, strengthened during this time, and that desire to, you know, really think of who else might be able to play a role. I hope that is a major part of our culture going forward, because 20 plus years ago when I first landed here, maybe the crisis hadn't created that atmosphere, but it wasn't the case. You know, every organization sort of had head down doing its own thing, and I think boards almost felt like it was a betrayal to even support another organization, and that's not the case now. The generosity of the community has been exceptional. Anybody else want to speak to silver linings or things that might be carried forward?
Yeah. I would say the awareness that our community can contribute in small ways that make a big difference. They don't have to write a $20,000 check or even a $100 check. We had volunteers handwriting notes, which we hand delivered to our seniors or mailed them. And just to receive some mail or get a phone call, we have volunteers calling our seniors who wanted some socialization and just to talk to somebody. The impact that made, you know, it's all a collaborative effort, and it doesn't have to be major. Just, you know, giving up an hour of your week, baking a dozen cookies, not 100, but collaboratively, it made a huge difference.
Yeah, and I mean, the upside of Zoom is that, you know, people don't have to drive to be somewhere. We can offer our job and life skills training to somebody in Fairfield, and they can participate and get that education and information. Same with, we got really creative, and like we'd buy 20 make your own herb garden kits and say, hey, come pick up your herb garden kit, and then get online and we'll do a kind of group activity that's a support group idea, but it's more around, you know, making connection and providing the group interaction, but it's something that people could do together. So you figure out how you can do things and that people don't have to be there in person, and that actually increases the ability for a lot of people to participate when they might not otherwise be able to. So
I think it's increased our conversations as well in terms of people running nonprofits to talk about it. So we've been able to identify these things like the trust gap that you referred to, or you know, a need for legal services that the Alliance can help take load off other organizations. And also we've had hard conversations because not only have we had COVID, but we've had, you know, Black Lives Matter protests were happening all this year. And so we've had really profound and supportive and challenging conversations. I think every organization is engaged in those and talking about how do we become anti-racist? How are we in the way? How are we helping? And I think to know that there's a community of people engaged in that is really empowering and emboldening. And I think we're going to see some justice-oriented, transformative things happening in our valley as a result.
I think destigmatization is huge here too. I think because more people were accessing the Hunger Coalition, you gave that stat before, or accessing, mental health care, or, every single one of us here, there's some kind of a stigma with getting help, or any of the organizations you listed previously. And so it's helped to make it more feasible because you're not such an outlier if you need help now, because so many people were forced to really have to reach out and ask for help during the stay-at-home orders. And so I think that's really helped to make things more acceptable and more so that you don't have to feel so guilty or feel like, you can't support for your family when really you can. It's just there's a pandemic happening and it's not on you.
One question I would have is with the amount of collaboration and coordination that's going on now, a lot of it's in delivery of services around this casework example, like let's help this individual, I've got something going on right now. Are there also some things in the works or to help deal with things at the systemic level? Because remember, we had a 50% ALICE population in this community before all of this happened. And I'm wondering, are there initiatives or anything where you guys are hopeful that we might be looking at it more systematically and not just in the instance by instance cases?
Yeah, I think Sarah can speak more to this than I can, but there are some efforts to put some policies in place at the county and community level to support people. So when the Safe Communities Act, so there are some things happening, and it's a little frustrating because we're seeing our state legislature do some horrific things, but like Sarah said, I think we're working together to address, some things in the education system to make sure the education system is more just and fair to all students. And I don't know if people have other examples of things that are happening that are changing policies and things that would have a more systemic impact.
A big one recently in the mental health field that's been really huge. We've already talked about how the fact that mental health increased recently with COVID and things. But if you have a child with a serious emotional disturbance, that's tough enough as it is. And you're trying to navigate those situations and services. And then all of a sudden you're just home with them all the time and they're dysregulated and it gets worse. So according to a previous law in the Mental Health Act in the state of Idaho, parents who went to seek emergency treatment for acute care for children like this risked being charged with abandonment or neglect and would lose custody of their children. And that was happening pretty actively statewide. I've gotten calls locally. It's been a pretty big issue. And so kind of at that more systemic level, I've spent in coordination with a couple other statewide agencies the last several weeks amending that mental health bill for the Children's Mental Health Act, because parents should never be afraid to have to seek mental health care treatment for their child and fear that they'll lose their rights. And it passed unanimously in both health and welfare committees on the House floor, and we anticipate it to pass on the Senate floor this week.
Great. Good.
I think the Safe Communities Act is a great thing that Tricia was talking about. It was led largely by Luis Alberto Laconda, but that separating immigration enforcement from public safety is a great example of a change, a very minor change that will have a massive impact on the population in the Valley. And I think, Zoom, I know everyone has Zoom fatigue, but the fact that we can get together so much more easily on Zoom for 30 minutes is allowing us to kind of take that macro view and see how systems that might have been invisible to us before can now be revealed. For the Alliance, that is racism. Can we be an explicitly anti-racist organization, and what does that look like? And can we make room for other organizations to be that way? Because I do think a lot of what we face, a lot of the stuff that we're cleaning up is, structural poverty, structural racism, structural oppression. And so if we can, as a county, attack those structures, then that can change what our work will look like and how we support our community to be a place where everyone can flourish.
We are getting some questions here, so I think I'll pose one now. Here's the question. How have and can your organizations reach local realtors, lawmakers, and homeowners to support affordable housing? Is the answer with public or private housing?
That's a big question. I mean, I think, first of all, people need to educate themselves about, what is here and what isn't here. And because I think some people don't understand what is affordable housing, what's subsidized housing, what the inventory is. So get educated about it. And then I think, through ARCH or Blaine County Housing Authority, they can provide a lot of good information. And then don't be a NIMBY, if, they're proposing it in your backyard, I mean, hopefully you can get educated, get behind it, and figure out how to support it. Yeah, there's always problems or issues about parking and things like that, but a lot of those things can be addressed through the public process. And so, support all the affordable housing developments that you can. Those would be my initial ones around housing.
Seems like you need to have a whole thing on housing.
But I do think public-private partnerships are probably how it's going to happen. I think it has to be a combination. I think, we have to put the incentives in the right place, and, developers hedge when they're forced to have housing in their developments, but, there's good reasons for that. So I think the partnership is a big.
And we have an extremely generous community, and I know this issue concerns people who have the means to financially contribute in a private way to projects that would be a benefit to the community. And I think also there's this idea that everybody might want to regulate what is their relationship to this community, and how much are they in it for the experience and the love of the community and the place and the people, and how much is their pocketbook a priority in their experience of this community, whether it's an asset and it needs to appreciate or it's not worth owning. I don't know. People need to think about their own priorities relative to their engagement with this community. I'd be interested in knowing what you think it's going to take to sort of bounce back. What should people expect? The vaccines are coming online. People are starting to feel safer. What does that mean for the populations you serve? Anything, or what's the road ahead? Do you forecast for the populations that you've been most intensely working with?
Well, we can't forget that there are 50% of our community that struggled now and will struggle for a long time to really not just navigate this situation, but anything that sets them back or build their own social and or financial capital in the future. And just to remember that we are supporting those communities right now, and we can't forget them in the coming years, because they may not be your next door neighbor, but I can guarantee you they're 3 doors down, and that's what makes our community vibrant, as we always can be proud about in the Wood River Valley.
I would say, sadly, for quite a few seniors, they will never rebound. I've been working with a gal who, she's 94 years old. She used to drive to the center twice a week, once for bingo and then another time to have lunch. She'd drive her now 100-year-old friend to the center, and she's given up. She wants to die. And she's lost mobility. She used to drive at 94, and she can't go out. And so now she's going to pass away in the next couple weeks.
The mobility thing is an interesting one. I even know from talking with Swiftsure that when they had to shut down the clients they serve, the degree of setback that comes from not being able to stay in some regimen of support is much greater than we would imagine. So you can't go to your therapy. Well, it's not that you can't go to your therapy, it's that you start to regress from a place of positive or aspirational health. And I know that there's a lot of people who will be recovering for a long time. I think the generosity of our community has been excellent. And talking to the Hunger Coalition, I know people recognized right away food would be an issue, and they saw amazing support, but food will still be an issue. And I think they have reservations about how enduring will the attention be on that need when it feels in anybody's individual life like things are back to some form of more normal. What can people be doing? What would you like our audience to be thinking about how they can play a positive role in addressing the human services concerns and crises in our community?
Well, I'm an optimist, so barring a massive third wave, I'm hoping that things are going to get back to normal. And we're seeing our clients who, fortunately for us, I understand what's going on with the older generation. Most of our clients are younger, have kids. They're all breathing a sigh of relief. The kids are back in school, letting them get back to full employment. But I think as far as what people can do, if you're a landlord, I would continue to be as flexible as you can with your tenants. If you're an employer, pay your staff, get your employees back as much as you can to work, pay them as well as you can. Just help, get people back employed, paid well, and that will help us recover faster, I think.
You mentioned what landlords can do. I know from Mountain Humane that the inability to find housing where pets are permitted exacerbates the fact that we have very little inventory. And if that inventory doesn't allow you to keep a family pet, then you have a mental health and a whole other disruption thing going on in a time of stress. And so maybe consider a pet deposit. I think Mountain Humane's even helping raise money to help people with the pet deposit part of first, last, and getting started in a new residence. So yeah, that's a good suggestion. Anybody else have recommendations for our listeners to how they can be a positive influence on this?
A huge thing for us with whenever we talk to an adult who's like, I think I need to go seek mental health care, I'm ready to go get treatment, I'm ready to get help. The top two reasons why an individual will not go get help is because they fear that they will not have a job when they return, or the cost, and that it'll bankrupt them when they do return, even if they still have a job, because of the cost of it. And so I can't stress enough the importance of accepting mental health in the workplace, and just making, if they're like, I just really need a mental health day, I'm really having a rough day, I'm feeling really down, or, things like that, not having it be like, oh, well, I don't want to deal with that, we're going to, let them go, because Idaho's a work to right state, and that is a big problem. Even in an amazing community like we have, that's a reality sometimes. So just being conducive and understanding over that.
There's a huge need for lawyers. I'll call on all the lawyers listening. I'm amazed at it, and that's something that came up in conversations across organizations. My father's a lawyer, and he always said, isn't it amazing that you need a lawyer to navigate like life's basic things, But with the populations we serve, that's compounded by status, and so I think that every organization has people who need legal help, and that's something that we are really trying to grow our capacity for by bringing a lawyer on staff. But if people would like to donate their time, we would love to work with them to support our community, because it's something concrete you can do. You can, at the end of the day, you can know I did something that really mattered in somebody's life.
I was going to say, share your wallet, obviously, your time. If there are places you can volunteer and really make a difference, but also your resources, your relationships, your contacts, your knowledge. There's a lot of places, the programs that Trish offers, you could share knowledge there, and we can get people into those classes, but often people don't know how to navigate the system or have the right relationship at the right bank with the right person to say, yes, you can get forbearance on, and we helped many people that way because they just didn't understand that was for them. And they might have gotten a no on the first time they called, but they didn't know how to push a little bit further down that road. And so if you have the knowledge to help someone, or a skill, medical, dental, surgery, things that are not covered under some of the typical medical plans are some of the biggest bills that we're seeing. And so we have a few individuals that we've worked with, but if you have those skills and things that cost people money, that you can give a little bit of your time there or here. Attorneys are, another bucket, but there are many skill sets out there that can be shared with people in our community that really need it.
Right. And of course, why should everybody care if they are not themselves in a firsthand experience of these stresses? Why should people want to help and care, and other than the altruism and the goodness of their heart? Why is it relevant to everybody?
Because the more people that thrive here, the better this place is for everyone. It's a lovely and amazing place to live, but if there are people struggling, that's going to take away from that. And so let's have everybody thriving.
And also, who do you hold yourself accountable to? Who do you feel called to to care for, who cares for the stranger? I think that's, every major religion talks about like you're supposed to tend the stranger and the vulnerable. And I think one of the things about the pandemic is it's raised those questions like who's my family, and family can be expanded. And I think in this community in Blaine County, you can think of this as a family, and that you're called to care for someone you might not know, you might not ever meet, but that, like Tricia said, when the more people flourish, we all flourish. The more vibrant we are, the more vibrant each of us is. And I think that that's a radical way to think about what it means to be a community.
I think that it will eventually impact you. You may not think that it does directly, but at one point maybe an employee will have to care for their aging mother, or your son or daughter's teacher is worried about where they live, and your son and daughter isn't getting the education they deserve because they have mental health issues or they're worried about being evicted. So it doesn't directly impact them. They don't see that, but there are impacts. It does really. Yeah,
well, there's a quarter of our population that is at the brink of some emergency or more, or half the population. They're the same people that we all depend on for the daily services and sort of lubrication in the whole community here, right? Anyone want to make any final remarks? And we're at the hour, and I thought I might wrap up. No? Well, I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank our audience for participating, and thank the Argyros for giving us the wonderful space in which to do this, and Dark to Light Productions for making us look so slick and contributing their time and effort. This was an experiment to hold these roundtables, and I myself, and I know everybody who's been involved, is open to comments and suggestions about whether forums like this are of use, whether we might try and do them again in the future. This was a 3-part series as an experiment, but there's so many topics we haven't touched or gotten deep enough into. And if this is a kind of forum where you feel you're learning things and would like to do more of, please share that with us. And I thank you very much for joining us. Have a good night.